Welcome to our Full Sail University Hall of Fame panel on storytelling and immersion with sound. Thank you all for joining. Let's please give a warm welcome to our 5 fabulous panelists. Welcome, guys.
Hi, so I'm Mark Kilborn. I'm a sound designer. I work in the video game industry. I'm joined by Alex, who works in film sound, David, Juan, and Gary, who you probably have all seen before. We wanted to have a conversation today about storytelling and immersion through sound, and the goal here is to just discuss how we control the listener, or in my case, the player, how we control the viewer, the player's interest, how we get them to feel the things we want them to feel, how we know what to focus on in a mix, and just kind of the general process of where's the art in what we do beyond just the technical of how to get all the sounds playing and make things audible. So we've brought a few clips to play. I've got a few questions I wanted to ask our panelists. I'm going to start with Gary because he decided to crash us today and join us.
Boom.
We're very happy to have you. So Gary, when you're looking at a scene in a project that you're working on, how, and I know the answer is going to be different depending on what the film is, but like, what is your thought process? How do you figure out what you want the viewer to focus on, and how do you control their attention and get them to focus on that?
Well, you're absolutely right in that every situation is going to be different. There's never going to be one answer that solves everything. So I'm going to apologize for that gray area there. But, when we're mixing feature films, at least, we have many, many, many tracks and many, many layers. And the most important thing really always is going to be that center channel, because that's the screen that you're looking at. That is the direction your head is in, and that is where your attention is going to be. So if you're really looking to get attention, it's got to pop right off that screen. That said, there are all kinds of supporting factors that you can use where you start to spread things beyond that center channel. You start getting into the left-rights. But now with immersive sound and Atmos and DTSX and all these formats, you can go even wider. You can still be in front of the listener while being wider than that center channel, wider than the screen itself. And there are degrees of that too. So it's a matter of how wide do you want to play a particular element to support what the focus is coming right off that screen.
Right. And so how do you decide what the focus should be?
Well, that depends upon the moment.
Right. I mean, can you maybe think of an example from something you've worked on that?
Ooh, every movie.
Yeah,
I mean,
there are so many. Juan and I had the privilege of mixing on Oblivion, which was the first. Was it the first release that had the native Atmos mix that was released, and we went for it on that one, and we took some risks, and some of them worked and some of them didn't, and that's okay. The fact is that the movie's really fun, and Joe, our director, allowed us a lot of margin to experiment with it. There's of course, sound effects are fantastic in that film, and certainly that Reel 1 opening sequence is kind of a love letter to immersive sound. But also with the music, we had wonderful degrees of separation with the music, where the brass is coming out wider than the strings are coming out, and the percussion, yet the mono piano at some point, all working around voiceover. It's a million different challenges in a million different ways, but that's a particularly good example. I don't have it here, but for everybody to check out at some point.
Yep. Cool. So Alex, what are the methods you use to kind of decide how to figure out what the viewer needs to hear, and how do you get their attention there?
Obviously, like we're saying, it depends on the film. I guess I try to lead with emotion. I'm an indigenous person of Alaska, and I look at everything with an indigenous perspective. A lot of times I reflect on sort of the things I grew up with. A lot of our songs and stories so much talk about and emulate the land and the animals that are on it. So for me, it's maybe more of an emotional, what is the director trying to get out of this piece, and kind of leading with that mindset.
Cool. So from my experience with Call of Duty, that's the thing I've been doing for the last 10 years. It's a little bit different than film because we're not necessarily trying to, I don't want to say we're not trying to give the player emotion, but our game is much more about it's much more about action, combat, excitement, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we give gameplay data to the player that's relevant to them at any given moment. So, one of the things I'm usually asking myself whenever I'm mixing is, what does the player need to hear at any given moment? Are we making sure that they can hear that? If it's a person sneaking up on them, can we, push that up in the surrounds wherever that other player may be? How do we push down the rest of the mix to kind of clear a space for that sound to cut through? And we have to do it systemically in a game because we're not linear. So we end up teaching the mixing engine a lot of rules as far as, like, if an AI is targeting the player, if a certain number of AIs are targeting the player, then which one is the closest threat. Let's turn the volume of the other ones down. Let's turn the volume of the footsteps and the gunshots of the one that's the closest threat up. So it's kind of a tricky thing, and it's like I said, it's different from film in that we're still trying to achieve that immersion and that feeling, but we're thinking about it in a different way. And there are often times when I'm kind of envious of what you guys get to do, because you get to have it be the same each time, but then you're dealing with a lot more elements than we are, and you're dealing with a lot more emotion than we are. So it's definitely a different challenge. So David, you do a lot of sound design, obviously. Does this enter your thought process as you're building sounds for scenes?
Yeah, I mean, the sound design process, it is also diverse. Sometimes I'm just making files to go into a library for somebody else to cut with, but a lot of times I'm making things and cutting them straight to picture as I see them. And I think along the questions lines of, how do we choose what to play, what not to play. If I'm cutting the scene myself, I usually just go for you play it down. Obviously, first you don't have any sound there, and I'm just going for what is my eye drawn to? What needs support? And you start building upwards from there, and you just keep playing the scene down. And if I find that when I finally got the scene right, I'm watching it as a viewer as opposed to the person working on it. And I find that if I've hit play and I've gone 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I'm actually working. If I find that I'm following the story like the audience is, then I can stop working on that. But if I'm distracted and kind of like, well, as the flow isn't feeling quite right, or I've got too much here, or I'm kind of missing something there, then I keep building on it.
I was asked that question during a talk yesterday, and that really stumped me, and that's a great answer for it. Somebody asked me, how do you know when to stop? Like, how do you know when to stop putting sounds into a scene or stop taking them away? And it's a good point. And when you finally feel yourself kind of become the viewer, the player, and get more lost in the experience, that's when you know, hey, maybe I'm getting into the right neighborhood.
Because you don't want to overdo it, just keep baking on it. You don't.
Yeah.
Once it's good, move on. You don't because you overdo it and then it loses its luster.
Right, and I imagine working on Avengers stuff, Juan, you've probably certainly had many scenes where there's so many things going on. I mean, how do you keep all of that straight?
Yeah, that is a hard thing to do. My rule of thumb about sound and story is that I usually try to watch it as a viewer, as a fan, just watch the movie and listen to the dialogue, and just try to get in that same headspace the director is in. So really, the directors, they know what the story is, right? And us as mixers and the sound people, our job is to help them tell that story with sound. And the more you work with a certain director, the more you start to realize how they want things to play and all that. So I work with the Rizzo brothers. This is the 4th film I've done with them, so I kind of already know what they want and how they want it. And to them, they're very emotional. Each one of them, it's all about the story. It's all about feeling happy or sad or scared or, all that. And so I try to see the movie the way they see it. And then once you do that, you know what's important. Right, so this scene is all about, Captain America fighting Thanos or something. So we want to hit these key moments. And in battle sequences, there's hundreds of things happening on screen. They know that they want you to focus on just this character. So everything else kind of takes a back seat. We first work on what we want the viewer to see and follow along with the story, and then everything else is icing on the cake. So I usually go through and I watch it and I'm like, oh, that's important, that's important, that's important. Make sure that's playing correctly. Now let's add all this other stuff. So it's always about the action that's happening. Oh, this shot hit this person and that person fell to the ground. So make sure we hear that shot because that's what we're seeing, you know. So yeah, a lot of it is I use this. The picture is the roadmap, really, for me.
But part of being, I think, a good mixer is having a good heart. And when you know that you're done, I want to echo back to what David was saying. When do you know when you're done? It really is a feeling that you get. I think that we'll work on something, and all of a sudden, it'll feel like it's in phase.
Yeah.
And that's when you say, okay, I think we're good.
Yeah.
I think we walk away from this for now. And often that's the right time, that's the right response. And when you do go back and look at it later, you think, oh, that felt right. It's a feeling. And that's a hard thing to teach.
Yeah.
No?
Teach that.
I have a question. Do you ever feel like you get to that point and then you come back and you're like, oh, thought I was there, but I wasn't. Keep
Oh,
going.
yeah. Yeah, that'll happen.
Sure.
Or, sometimes it's extreme where you go, wow, we had already overworked it. We gotta simplify this.
Pull back.
Yeah.
Yep.
That happens, but that's part of the creative process. Yeah.
How involved do you all find that the directors are in this? Do they often articulate to you what is important moment to moment, or do they leave it to you to discover, or is it just a mixture depending on the director, or?
Well, I've done a lot of Marvel movies, and they make movies a lot differently than other people. It's a huge production, and the directors, by the time we're in the final mix, they are being pulled in like 7 other different directions. They're color timing, they're doing visual effects reviews, they're still messing with the picture, they're doing press, they're doing all this other stuff. So we figured out a way to do it where we get to work on the reel, for example, reel 1. We'll do a pass on it, take 2 days. I'll sit there with my mixer partner, Tom Johnson. He works on dialogue and music. I'll do effects. We'll do a pass. We set up a time for the directors to come in, sit down, watch the reel, and give us notes. So that is great that we get our time to do that, and then they go away.
Yeah.
Then we work on the next reel, and it's like that. So for that process, we only really see them, however many reels we have, we see them that one time to play the whole thing back. And then we play the whole movie back at the end from top to bottom. We see them there. We do another note session. And then they come back sporadically to watch certain sequences that they're really attached to. So I don't really see them that often. Compared to other films. Like I've worked on movies where the director is in the room, sitting in between Gary and I, all day, all the time, and they tell us what they want, and it's that's too loud, or I want to raise that dialogue line, So and we go through it together. And to be honest, I like that because you do one pass, and now it's right.
You get less notes.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Okay, so I'm kind of hopping between topics a little bit, but back to sound design and editing. One of the things I've found fascinating, and I've experimented a little bit with it in some of the game work I've done, is juxtaposing sounds that don't necessarily match visuals, but doing it in such a way that it creates kind of an emotional response out of a viewer. So, making a gun sound like a cannon, or making something big sound really small, or a great example, although I guess it was more mixing, was I finally got to watch The Last Jedi recently, and I hope we're past the statute of limitation on spoilers, but the hyperdrive scene where she fires her ship through the giant destroyer, and the whole thing just goes completely silent, right? How consciously do you think about that when you're editing sounds, when you're choosing stuff? Is it instinctive, or do you consciously decide, I want to put something in here that doesn't necessarily match this, but that helps make a point or sell a certain story element?
You could have given me that question earlier. Because I don't really have a good answer for that. I mean, I can't think of an example. I think it's probably instinctive, and I'm not necessarily looking for a sound that is not what something is. Usually,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a content creator, so I'm always just trying to find something that matches in. And you know, sometimes you have to get super out there, you know, to find something that works. Other times it's simple little things like I just don't have enough of one thing. I remember back on the second Mortal Kombat, I was making some vocals for the Baraka dude, and I was using like a seal sound for it, but I only had like 2 of the sounds. So I could cut them in. I really liked them, and I brought in Mike Kemper, who was the guy working with me on the show. And I said, "What do you think this sounds like?" Because I knew he probably wouldn't know what that sound was. It was a weird sounding seal. And he's like, "Well, it sounds kind of like a plastic cup." So I was like, "Oh, cool." So since he thought it was a plastic cup, I just went to Target and bought a bunch of plastic cups, and then I did a whole recording session of the scraping sounds of these plastic cups to make that out of. So you know, it was kind of like he didn't know what it was, so he gave me a whole bunch of source that were easy to get. And then I wound up using those for a lot of the really raspy part of the ring wraiths later, you know. And there's been the similar type of things where I didn't have a rocket sound, but somebody thought it sounded like a wet car by, so I started using wet car bys for rockets. So I don't know. You know, I'm always just looking for what I can get the gig done with, you know. And sometimes it's just weird stuff, out there stuff.
Okay. So I kind of want to speed through this a little bit because I want to make sure we have some time for some questions, and we're already 25 minutes into this. Do you all want to check out some of these clips and hear these folks talk about what they worked on? All right, let's. I'm going to start with Alex's clip that you brought. You want to give us any intro to this before we watch it?
Yeah, so it's a prelude to a bigger film. It's kind of a poem that talks about a young indigenous person growing up in an urban area that maybe didn't grow up in a rural community and didn't have that upbringing. Some of the struggles in that life, but also what I did with the sound, kind of honoring some of those ambiences, and it's all slow-mo, so kind of having these like dreamy sort of whooshes and a lot of reverb going on in this. So it's kind of a dreamy piece. Hope you guys enjoy it. Unfortunately, we can't play it on the live stream, but you guys will get to see it.
All right, here we go.
probably be showing you.
That's beautiful.
That's amazing.
lovely.
That's
really
Thank
nice.
you.
Really nice.
Thank you.
Really nice.
Appreciate it. As far as the mix at the end, when there's the shot of the little boy, he's looking back at himself, as a little boy and with his mom, kind of pulling all the sound effects away in that and verbing out the music, like way out to create sort of this emotion and just hearing his performance. And when we recorded that, he was getting choked up and like you're hearing kind of the break in his voice. And I just wanted to pay focus on that and, have a little bit of like these kind of almost like tonal effects as well in there to just draw the emotion of that part. So that's kind of one of the things I messed with a little bit in that one.
Yeah, I thought it worked really well. I liked the moment that struck me was him setting the I don't know if it was paper mache, but the head on fire. Just the way it all very focused in on
The piñata head of the,
pinata head.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so you brought a couple of clips,
Yeah.
Dave. Do you have a particular one you'd like me to play? Or do you want to play them
I
both?
think we should at least do Drums in the Deep
Okay.
first, and I'll talk about it a little bit first. I mean, normally in these sort of scenarios, I'd like to play this and then we'll talk about it afterwards. But since we are really short on time, I'm going to just talk about this for a second. This is in Fellowship of the Ring when the Drums in the Deep, when Pippin knocks over the skeleton that falls down the thing, and then we hear the orcs in the distance and all that. And the reason I chose this for storytelling is because we had a really unique opportunity. The music dropped out. It's a super quiet scene for the most part, and almost all the action or what's coming is done with sound, because we never ever see the orcs until they come through the door, but we can hear them coming, and the cave troll, we can hear him coming and all that sort of stuff. And we're building all of that. Even when the skeleton falls down the well, the only bit you see is the very bit at the top where the chain goes down and stuff like that, and all of that echoing through the shot of the miniatures. That's all us. And I felt like it worked pretty well. But there's some other really small details in here that I like a lot. And it's just like when Gandalf's flipping the book. We put a little grit, like the book was old and dusty, and you hear the grit fall on the ground and just sort of tinkle away. And that was I thought that was a nice touch, a very tiny thing in silence that shows you just how quiet the room is. And the same sort of thing happens later after the thing hits the bottom of the pit, and they're waiting to see what happens. Boromir just sort of leans forward, and there's like just a little grit on his footstep, and that just tells us just how quiet this room is. So that's all I want to say about it.
Ready? All right. Cool. Here we go.
Drums in the deep. We cannot get out. A shadow moves in the dark. We cannot get out. They are coming. Fool of a took. Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
They have a cave troll.
Let them come. There is one dwarf yet in Moria who still draws breath.
So there's a couple other things in there I forgot to mention that I thought were important storytelling points. Is right when Legolas, right before he says orcs, we hear one cry, and we didn't know what that was before, but now we hear that sound and he identifies it, so now we know from that point forward what that sound is. And we did a lot of these sounds this was before Altiverb existed or any sort of IR reverbs. So we took all these sounds and we re-recorded them in these tunnels with the microphones were 100 feet away down these tunnels. So that's all that reverb that's on those things. All that distance is actual natural distance, and I think that's why it sells so well. Not just a reverb, but the microphone is physically 100 feet away from the source.
So when you were working on that scene, at least the front part of it, where there were only the couple of little musical elements, but for the most part it was silent. Was that something you knew up front that it was going to be a scene without music, or did you build expecting that it might be?
We hoped it would be.
Hoped it would be.
I mean, we had in the guide, because a lot of times we work with the guide track, which has a temp music track in it, and hopefully it's a roadmap to tell us where things are going to be and not going to be. It's not always the case, but we generally work with that, and that was quiet through there. Another important thing is the drums were us, but we were very careful not to start a beat that we thought might be a score or might be confused as score. I mean, and that we could get out of when the music came in, and we didn't feel like we had to perpetuate and keep going.
Yeah, and I liked that. I liked that initial cry before he says orcs, because it helps build that tension. Like you hear that and you have that brief moment of what is that? Like it kind of scares you a bit, and then he calls it out, and then it jumps into the next step. But it's a great example of what we're here to talk about, which is you're kind of playing with the viewer's emotions a bit by doing that. You're giving them that little sense of fear and questioning before you actually reveal what's going to happen. Do you want to play the last clip and then we'll...
I don't want to eat up I'd love to, but I don't want
All right. Do you guys want to start taking questions?
Yeah.
Or do you have anything else you want to say on the topic? Or?
Sure.
All right, let's jump to questions. Who has a question for all of these folks? There's one. What's up? Oh, actually, hold on just a moment. They're going to run mics out to you. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh, there it is.
So I was wondering is this on or?
No.
Nope. There you go.
Okay. So I was wondering, for the type of films that you guys are working on, there's a lot of fantastic elements in some of this, or sci-fi, and in some of this you're aiming for something more real. So I was kind of wondering, how do you find that balance between maybe taking real things to make fantastical or science fiction things, and when you have something real, like you were saying in Call of Duty, how do you balance the idea of making it real but fake enough so that you go more into the experience than actually trying to imitate the actual sound that you want to produce?
Well, I want to hear your answer on this too, for sure. But in Call of Duty, it's, I guess what I often would think about is not so much what would the sound actually sound like, but what would I remember it sounding like. I've had the chance to fire a number of guns and things over the years as part of my job, and they're very loud, and there's a lot of feeling, like you feel the shockwave of the gun hit you, but as a sound, it's actually not that amazing a sound to fire a gun. It's just a really loud, impressive thing, but it doesn't sound as interesting. And you can't produce that with speakers. So generally, it's what I would say is I'm looking for what I like to call hyperrealism, and I'm looking for a feeling. So it's how can I kind of push the sound of that by doing, like I've done some really ridiculous things, like in the design of a sniper rifle, I might put like these huge metal impacts or tears at the beginning of the transient to try to give that kind of ripping sensation of a gunshot, of a large caliber gunshot. But to me, it's very much a feeling thing, and it's looking for something that feels hyper realistic. It doesn't feel realistic, but you also have to be really careful to make it feel organic. So I try to build a lot from recordings, and it's funny, the longer I do this, I feel like I use less and less plugins as far as designing stuff.
Buy more and more.
Yeah, because the more stuff you pile on it in terms of an effects chain, the less organic and real it sounds. And if I were working on something that was more sci-fi, I'd be less concerned with it. But everything I've done has been at least sort of grounded in reality. I want to hear your answer too.
It's not a sophisticated answer. It comes back to feeling, and the picture drives what the sound needs to be. All of those Lord of the Rings films, there was not a single second that a synthesized sound or anything processed like that would survive. It just, when you watch it down, you can tell that doesn't fit. So when we start working on Marvel stuff, that almost requires a lot of strangely messed up sounds, flanged things, synthesized generated things, but you still want it to sort of have a root in reality, but it comes down to just you play it down. Does it work? Does it not work? But the picture pulls that out of you, and it's just sort of an instinctual thing. And as a fan of films and games and stuff, you have a sense already of what works, and you just have to trust that that the picture's driving you in the right direction.
And I'm kind of jumping off what you said. Something that I've thought a lot about over the years is, I feel like a big part of what we do requires you to develop a sense of taste. And I mean, I don't know the magic answer for how to develop your taste other than I listen to a lot of things, and I talk with colleagues about a lot of things that I listen to, and we discuss the things we hear and the things we like and the things we don't like. And I find that iteration helps a lot. Like I will do some work, and then I will come back to it the next day, and I'll listen to it again. And not just listen to it again and change it. Sometimes I'll say, I'm just going to redo this for the sake of redoing it and see if I get something better on the next try. And sometimes through that cycle of iteration, you find something that feels a little more exciting. But a lot of it is about just developing your taste, and that helps you get the feel of what feels right and what doesn't. And for that, I think you just have to do a lot of work and listen to a lot of stuff. Would you all agree with that?
That is the hardest thing to
Yeah.
teach, is taste. You can't really teach it. You have to experience it. You have to spend some time either looking at projects or experiencing projects and identify what you like and what you don't like. And that's when mentorship actually, I find, really kicks in and is super helpful. You get to sit watching somebody else execute their craft, and you can have a feeling about it. You're allowed to have an opinion. I wouldn't suggest you shout it out in the room, but you're allowed to have it and think about it and watch the process of how is this happening and what is successful and what isn't successful and what did you like that went forward and what didn't you like. You're not going to learn it in a classroom, really. I mean, talk to people and watch movies or play games or do the things that you're searching for to develop your own taste. And then it will be yours. And then you get to do it going forward.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions over here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Apologies for the chair. It's right here. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
So this is a question for all of you, but for the one with the indigenous guy, was there a point where you seen the film without any audio at all and just kind of thought of the emotions that you had for the music?
Yeah, it was given to me with nothing. They did, they recorded it. It's all slow motion stuff, so they're not capturing production sound on that. So everything I had 100% had to build. And that piece, it was just a poem, and he was gonna have all these visuals that went with it, with the storytelling of it. But what it felt like, it was too much words. You couldn't take a second to breathe and take it in. So that's when I suggested, and it actually switched the actual picture, where we just kind of cut it, find a place in the music where we can fade out and have just a place where it's just sound and taking a moment to have the listener and the audience take in what's actually going on and why this is so important. And while he's burning this cultural appropriative head mascot, And so I don't know if I answered your question quite right. But yeah, I basically had to build it all from scratch.
A few more.
All right.
Hello? Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Jeremy Brown. Fantastic listening to you guys. I just want to know, when it comes to games and for the film, for your futuristic sci-fi fantasy sounds, how do you start with your base, I guess? Creating, for your large impact weapons, what is the thing that starts you off, or for your crazy monsters or insane locations, how do you decide what you're going to be putting in there and what that's going to be the focus point, I guess?
You want to take this one?
I think we should. Well, you're the weapons dude.
Yeah, but you're the monster, dude.
Well, monsters are hard. I'm not going to lie. That's the hardest thing, except for processing speech to sound natural. Doing monsters, in my opinion, is the hardest thing to do because we have such a small pool of actual cool things to make sounds with. We need to genetically breed hippos and tigers or something. I don't know, to get something new, but there's just not that much new out there. So I think one of the things that people do probably maybe I don't want to call it wrong, but I think it doesn't get you the end result as fast as you start too small. Because it's got to be way bigger than even what I do. I'll do something to think, okay, this is right, and they're like, it's too small. I'm like, I'm so sick of the bigger note. It just can't. Sometimes it just can't get any bigger. But this is. I don't want to eat up too much time with this question. I'm with the answer that because it's. There's only so many things I can pull from: lions, tigers, elephants, horses, donkeys, for those type of creatures. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that, a lot of times I'll start a roar with some sort of impact or put a transient on it as opposed to just like a soft thing, and that gives it a nice launching point. But, depending on what I see, really dictates where I go.
So from the perspective of weapons and explosions and things, there's a couple of things that jump to mind. I tend to start, even if I'm doing something more sci-fi, I tend to start with something more ballistic and realistic. So I start with real weapon recordings. One of my favorite things to do, which is going to sound kind of silly, but I swear it's valuable. I fire up SoundMiner and I just crank the little vari-speed slider down like 30%, 40%, and just start previewing stuff and listening to it. It's amazing what you find just listening to everything pitch down a bit. But often it's, I tend to think about weapons. I did a talk on weapons yesterday, and I tend to think about it as the transient, the body, the tail. So I try to break the things up into components and just try to find the textures that I feel I can fit together, and it's a lot of experimentation. And when I'm doing more sci-fi stuff, I sometimes blend a little bit of synthesis or something into it. If it's sci-fi, when it's realistic stuff, I don't. But I don't know. It's a difficult answer, other than just get your hands on a lot of source material and listen to a lot of it and experiment with it and just pull different layers in and see how they work. And as you're building things up with layers, I usually do what I call playing accordion, where I suddenly get like 7, 8, 9 tracks deep, and I'm like, wait a minute, I got to pull some of these out, and then I put some more in, and then I pull some more out, and you keep experimenting until you start to get something that feels right. But a lot of pitch manipulation and a lot of building transients and that kind of stuff, I guess, is my answer. And again, it's a lot of feel. It's kind of instinctive. Thank you. You're welcome.
Great, and we have a question right here.
Hi there. So when you guys start a new scene that takes a definite tonal shift, or you start a brand new project that might be a very different shift from what you were doing before, what kind of talks do you have with your director? Or if you don't, what do you kind of do to start figuring out what you want to source things from for your sounds? And do you do that, I guess, is kind of how I should have started that question, but yeah.
Well, I think before we start the project, the director kind of already has an idea or, in the back of their mind, they want it to sound a certain way. And, usually you have these conversations early on with the directors, and they'll give you some really weird sound notes, and you're trying to decipher them into what exactly are they talking about? Oh, I want it to feel threatening. You're like, okay, threatening. It's not a very sound term, but they usually, when in the picture department, they're building the movie, they're already kind of setting the path for what it's supposed to sound like. So when sound actually starts, which we hope is close as possible to when picture department starts building the movie. I mean, they've already started, but we're soon after that. There's a lot of sending them sounds, and there's an approval process that happens. So, Dave will design a few things and then send it to them, and they'll say, yeah, I like this one, I don't like that, I like this, I like that. That comes back to Dave now. It was like, okay, so this is going to be they like sounds that look like this or sound like this or this. Okay, so this is going to be the roadmap. And then from there, it just snowballs into, what you get. I mean, that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have back and forth with the picture department. On the Marvel ones, we do quite a bit when Jeff is the editor. And like for Thanos' Gauntlet, we made that fairly early and sent it down. They approved it, and it stayed in the Avid throughout, and the sound did not change to the final mix, which was a surprise. I mean, we liked it, but we were grateful that it survived, because it could have been one of those things that comes back to bite you in the end. It's like, well, that sound, we really wanted something else. What else you got? We've been living with it. But sort of back to your other question is, we have immense libraries now. We've been doing this so long. I have so much stuff on hard drives that I can pull from. I can watch a scene down or see what I'm going to be designing on it, and I can sort of know what I have source for to make some things for, and I can start to make a list of what we want to go record. And at Skywalker, we share Google Docs and stuff, and so if anybody has a record list or something they want recorded, the assistant will go record that thing for us. But we have an awful lot of things recorded already, and there's pretty cool commercial libraries out there too. If it's something very signature, like say for Thanos' Gauntlet, I'm not going to make that out of a commercial sound, because I want to make sure that's not something somebody can just pull and it'll show up in some other show. So I'll make sure that come from original content, or generate or go record.
The Gauntlet is a good example, because all it is a glove, but the sound that is attached to it is a very emotional sound. So when he uses it to torture, it sounds different than when he's using it during battle and all that. And that, I mean, Dave, he hit it out of the park when we first got that sound, and it was like, you hear it, you're like, what is that? And then we knew that was it, because, something nobody's ever heard before, so.
You knew it.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, okay, that's awesome. We're using that, So.
There are a lot of failed versions of in my library. There are lots of failed versions of the Gauntlet. But it came to the earlier point of, once it fits and it's like, okay, that's it. Let's go with that and see if they like that. But I've got lots of files that don't sound very like that at all.
Yeah, and I was going to say, related to that, that's something that I think that I misunderstood about sound design when I first got into this. When I was young in my career, I imagined that people like you and others would just sit down and amazing things would come out. And what I know now after doing this for a while is people fail all the time. And I found that, I told this story to somebody the other day, but the moment that really hit me was I was talking to a guy who's I don't want to name him, but he's a very well-known sound designer who I'm a huge fan of. And I was talking to him about a thread on Facebook where somebody was talking about how much of a fan they were of his work, and he said, but what they don't understand is the 185 times I failed before I found version 186 and it worked. So that's very common. We fail at this all the time, and we're always making the wrong things, and then we eventually find the right thing, and you have to churn through those.
This is why I like working alone in a room. And I'm serious. It's because I don't like somebody sitting over my shoulder, because I want to be able to try stupid things and make really bad things, because sometimes good things come out of it. But I want to have the freedom to be on my own, just trying crazy stuff, and not having somebody judge me on a failure that I know is, I'm going to get there, but I don't want them judging me on what is obviously
Which is
awful.
where Gary,
Which is where your
we get
lives
judged
live.
all the
Right,
time.
right.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I have to say, when I'm going to do something like that, I announce it to the room. Okay, this is going to suck for the next 3 passes, okay? But on the 4th one, it could be great. Just hang in there with me.
Yeah. Question?
Oh, over here. So, the home viewing industry is huge now, whatever you call it, like Netflix and whatnot. So as sound designers, how do you take that into consideration with making and mixing, like for the home viewing crew? Because, you have your huge surround sounds for the theaters, but at home someone's going to have maybe like a $20 TV that they have to watch something on. So.
Yep.
Yeah, but if we didn't mix for a power user, we'd be ripping off the power user. We have to consider everything, and that's really, I think, what you're asking is how do you consider everybody that's in the market when you're mixing for a streaming platform? And it's hard. It's not easy. You want to go for the gusto so that it plays awesome, but then you also want it to sound good on the earbuds. It's a challenge, and there are specs that we have to kind of fall into that is really catering to the average, and it's, I don't know, we try to, push it to the limit as best we can, but we also try to listen to it on different monitor environments and listen to it in stereo down mixes, and, we do our best. I don't know, you want to add to that? How do you?
I always try to mix for the best environment possible. Everything else after that is going to be a mix down of that. Compromise. So even though it's going to be on Netflix, if I work on a movie and they want it to be a 5.1, I'm going to make that 5.1 sound great. And then the stereo is going to be a mix down of that 5.1, but that's the stereo. I don't know. I always go for the highest quality thing I can do first. And then everything else is going to be a compromise. Because it's your choice to hear it on earbuds. We work really hard in these dubbing stages with tons of speakers. Everything's tweaked out, and the specs and all that are good. And everyone hears it on their phone. It's really sad, but
And you get to decide well, if you're going to mix, what is your brand? What is it going to be? Because your name's going to be on it. Do you want it to be pushing the envelope and kind of kind of awesome, or middle of the road? I don't know. It's like you do want to cater to the marketplace, and a lot of people are listening in stereo at the same time. I want it to be awesome, and I want to encourage people to have cool sound systems at home too. That's fun. Let's do that, So, yeah, you're right. You make it big as best you can and fun, and then everything else is a down mix and a moderate compromise at each step down the chain. I think it's the best way.
I spend a lot of time just seeing how my mixes actually translate. I have 3 TVs at home, so I'll listen on each TV, and they're different brands, and they all sound a little different. I think that's a good thing to also do, is because your piece might live, on iTunes or something like that, where most people might see it after the theater. So I think it's always good to just see how your work translates.
And in games, the approach to games, we have no theatrical release. So for us, it's always going to a home user. With Call of Duty, one of the things I discovered that I kind of hated, but most players listen in headphones. That's the most commonly listened to version of our game. So we would still design big, like you said, but anytime I made any mix adjustment, I would always check it on headphones. I would always check it on TV, just constantly. And I would try to make the surround version of it sound as great as possible, but I would try to minimize the compromises on the headphone and stuff, because there were times when you would have a big scene that's reliant, where all the power of it's living in the LFE, and then you put it in headphones and it's like, wow, it's just nothing.
Gone.
And so for me, I can't say, well, that's the compromise I'm going to live with that, because half our players are left out in the cold.
It would be great to do multiple mixes, but but there's no time, there's no money, and there's no infrastructure to carry multiple tracks of something. So you do have to do that. In film, we still have multiple deliveries, which is kind of good. We still have to do Atmos. We still do 7.1. We still do a 5.1 version of every film we work on. We even do a stereo of that, and then we also do a home theater version of it. So there's a lot of different versions, but you don't always have that flexibility, especially not in games.
Yeah.
It's on the disc. That's the only track that's on there. It's got to play on anything. So so it's hard.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We have time for one more quick question, then we're going to wrap things up today.
Hey guys, I was a DCBS student online, and I do a lot of productions that don't have the larger budgets. I don't have a budget for a sound mixer and so forth. So I'm the sound guy a lot of times. How deep would you suggest somebody going with their mix in that type of situation?
How deep?
Well, as far as inputting all the little pieces that take the piece to the next level, sometimes I don't have time to go out and get the Foley experience for screeching tires or whatever, so I'm getting off-the-shelf pieces or what have you to kind of make the mix.
I would say if you're maximizing your time and you're maximizing your resources and you're doing everything you can to do the best job that you can, nobody can ask anything else of you. If you're putting your heart and your soul into it and you're using every accessible resource that you have and you love it and you do it with a smile and that energy is coming through, there's nothing else to do. I'll bet you're doing a great job. I don't know, somebody else want to?
No, I agree with what you're saying, Gary. The one thing I would say, though, that I've, again, learned over my years is however much, when I have more time, I always try to iterate more and improve things more, because a thing I've learned is every time I think, wow, I'm putting so much work into this and so much effort into this, and then I look at the work of somebody who I feel is better than me, and I'm like, wow, they're automating a lot more than I'm doing. They're putting a lot more details. They're in there like writing every syllable of a dialogue line. Like, it feels like every time I throw all this effort into it and I look at somebody who's further up the food chain than I am, they're just going that much further. And so yes, do everything you can, maximize your time and maximize your effort, like Gary said. Just make sure you're doing that, because it's however hard you think these folks are working on their projects, they're probably working harder than you think they are. And they're putting a lot more detail into it than you think they are.
Yeah, I would say also, as long as the story that you're trying to tell is coming through, then you're good. I don't know that you need to necessarily add all the Foley. Is all the Foley going to make the story that you're trying to tell better? No.
Do we ever use all the Foley?
No, we don't.
Rarely.
Or is that, unless that tire screech is really an integral part of the story, then yes, I would say you need to do whatever you can to get that sound. But everything else, as long as that, if you're watching the piece that you're working on and the emotion and what you want the audience to feel is coming through, you've done enough.
Yeah, and I would say if you're looking at picture and you're hearing every single thing in a scene always, you're probably letting too much stuff.
Oh yeah,
you need to pull stuff
Yes.
back.
Yeah, absolutely.
That doesn't have any focus. We started this with, how do you get your focus? Make a good decision and maximize your resources.
Yep.
Make good emotional decisions and use your resources. You're on it.
Great advice. Thank you guys so much. How about one more round of applause for our storytelling panelists?